Thanks for joining Sonder's webinar. I'm Hudson. I'm the head of operations here at Sonder. Today we'll be speaking about the $29 billion problem and the need for early intervention in the injury management space. A bit of housekeeping to begin with. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question, we'll make sure we follow up via email after the webinar to address anything you might have raised. This session's recorded and we'll make it available afterwards, so you'll receive a link in this to the recording later this afternoon sent out. So I'd like to take the time to introduce our panelists and their respective expertise. So starting today, we have Matthew Fishman. So he is the director at Bodycare. So he'll be discussing the importance of timely, accessible physiotherapy in the proactive injury management space. He's been a qualified physiotherapist for 25 years. Next up, we have Andrew Wilson. Andrew Wilson is from the Blackmores organization, and he'll be sharing Blackmores' journey with early intervention, especially around the continuity of care and proactive risk management. So welcome and thank you for joining to our panelists and to everyone joining today. And we'll get into the presentation. So what is early intervention? Currently, Australia faces and the workforce a huge problem in $29 billion worth of workers' compensation costs annually. A large portion of that which stems from delays in accessing quality care. There's fragmented systems. There's a large administrative burden on organisations to often be the go-between between practices, providers, insurers. So this creates an often reactive system, and there's a lot of time in delay for individuals who require fast and accessible treatment. This means that injuries can escalate before they're managed effectively. There's delays and often means that there's increased recovery times, higher cost claims, extended absenteeism, and can also impact overall workplace productivity and employee well-being. So our first question to Andrew, what kinds of injury management challenges did Blackmores experience before you started to partner with Sonder to provide an early intervention solution?
Thanks, Hudson. I think our big thing is that you've got to look along the lines of, you've got to be able to identify exactly what you're targeting and where you want to actually make your best impact. So you've got to go out and do your identification of all your risk areas, what injuries are occurring. You've got to know those kind of the mechanisms, the root causes. Then you've got to go back through your hierarchy of control. You've got to do your engineering out where you can actually get reductions normally within your own workplace. You've got to know what your cost of injuries versus your cost of claims. You've got to work out where your best bang for buck is and where your cost structure is actually going. You also want to know how many injuries do you get recorded that transfer into a claim. So you want to know your severity rates as you're moving forward. And that then leads you into that next step of what repetitive tasks, what repetitive processes, how can you actually minimize those within in-house. You've also got to look at what's your demographics of your workforce. So for us, we've got a lot of workers that have been involved in a manual handling component in a long period of time, not only at Blackmores, but they've either come from another manufacturing environment where they've been doing a similar type role. And they're also, you've got an aging workforce. So everyone's getting older. You don't get a lot of young people coming into the manufacturing industry anymore, or they don't stay too long. So you've also got that age demographic component. And then you also have a look at how do you get good casual labour. So if you've got a certain amount of injuries through some of your older workers, how do you get a casual that comes in to recover those kind of productivity? But that's also leading to this 28.6 billion cost because you're actually turning that kind of component. So for me, it's the risk assessment is the big piece for us. But then you've got to also look at how do you offer that proactive service that provides the health benefit that's used for all employees, the care provider. How does it look for administrative reasons? And how do you get the comfort level of your employees that the service that's been offered is suitable for them? And it's not just a company-orientated one. You have that whole issue that comes across that employees are similar to a one-track mind in regard to the business only wants to send me off to their company doctor to get me back to work. Whereas the aim of the business is how do I get you into a qualified practitioner that can give you the proper care, quickest possible means of doing that. So that's where I sit mostly in that one, Hudson.
That's interesting. Given some of the challenges you mentioned there, aging workforce, the accessibility, what would you see as the difference between a traditional treatment or injury management approach as opposed to a faster early intervention mindset?
I think that if you take the injury treatment component, it's the matter of you're not looking for the root cause, you're not looking for the mechanisms. So the injury treatments, they've already been injured. You actually want to try and get rid of the actual injury beforehand, whereas early intervention for us can be our on-site physios. How do you involve an on-site physio very early in the piece? And one of the ways we actually do that is we like to have our physios out on the floor where they're working with the operator, so they know exactly what the task is, how they assess that task, how they provide appropriate manual handling components. Is there potential to do short, sharp exercises or stretches in micro breaks whilst they're doing that work? So you're actually wanting to, the early intervention is you're preventing that employee even needing the early treatment or a treatment component. So if that starts to work well, you should be actually cutting down some of your whole cost of claims, cost of injuries, loss of time and things like that. And you're also giving the aging workforce different strategies that they can start to utilize at home, because even though they're at work 8-10 hours a day, they've got the other 22 odd hours left that if they start to get into an exercise program, into a stretching program, it aids them in their own life as well. So it's a matter of selling the whole program as a 24/7 program, not just an at-work program.
Thanks. So a follow-up, switching to Matt, from a physio's perspective, you partner with a lot of organizations. What's some of the challenges that you see across different organizations when it comes to immediate access to care?
Yeah, good question. And look, I think Andrew's spot on with his comments there. I think, look, traditionally what we find, and we've been doing this for a very long time, just over 20 years in this occupational health space, and what we tend to find when we engage with a new client is often the old model of injury management is wait for an injury to occur. Usually that injury, is relatively serious, and then people are sent off site for treatment. I think what we find as on-site physios primarily is when people get niggles, they've got small amounts of pain, things that don't necessarily restrict their ability to function or ability to work, they usually don't report it. They usually bite their tongue, they usually push through a little bit of pain thinking it's not too bad, it's not affecting my home life, it's not affecting my work. And 2-3 months might pass, they keep doing their job. And what we find is a lot of the times those small niggles progress to what was once an acute little injury to more of a chronic type injury. From a physio point of view, by the time that person has had pain for 3 months, 4 months, and they attend an off-site physio clinic, those chronic injuries are difficult to treat. They take a lot longer to treat, often require modified or restricted duties. On odd occasions, they might require people being off work entirely. So what we encourage in this early intervention space is the early reporting of niggles. From a treatment point of view, from a physio, from a doctor point of view, when you can see someone day 1, day 2 with a small amount of neck pain, small amount of lower back pain, on average, we're discharging people in less than 2 sessions across the country, as opposed to when people go off site for these more chronic type injuries and they're 10, 15 sessions later, they're still on modified duties or off work. So for us, it's about changing a culture. A lot of the time, there is a culture in an organization with individuals that I'm not going to say anything until it gets to a point where I can't function. So when we engage with clients in that early intervention space, we try and shift that culture to a culture of early reporting. Report your niggles day 1. That's when we're going to get the best outcome for the worker and the best outcome for the employer as well. And that can be a difficult thing to do. Early intervention is not about, sweeping claims or LTIs or MTIs under the rug. Early intervention is about catching things as early as possible to have the best possible outcome. And I think it's not just the early reporting of niggles and injuries. You need to think of early intervention as what are we doing? What is the employer doing outside that treatment room to try and mitigate risk and bring risk down in the first place? And often that needs to be data driven, to look at that data, the injury data, the early intervention data, to guide those prevention strategies that Andrew was talking about. They need to be targeted as well, and specific to the needs of the site and the organisation. So yeah, for us, it's a change in culture, which can be difficult to do, but we just find when we're able to catch people early from a clinician point of view, the outcome is so much quicker. You know, you don't have to modify duties at all, and people are back at work full duties within 1 to 2 sessions.
That's excellent. So Andrew, back to yourself. Have you seen instances or a trend in which delays of getting really fast treatment has impacted the individual and the organization's overall cost and to the organization?
Yeah, I think that just to Matt's point there is that rapport between the employee and the early treatment provider is crucial. Where we have a system in place for ours. It doesn't have to be a work-related incident. They're going to see the on-site physio. It can be something that's happened at home, on the way to work. It doesn't really matter if they just need to see a physio. They go in and see a physio. So sometimes you can actually end up with more reporting, and sometimes the early treatment in the early days actually outweighs some of the potential costs. But you're building up that, as Matt mentioned there, the culture component where they're confident to go in and see the on-site physio early in the piece because they're getting good advice and they're getting the necessary treatment. But back to the main question you just asked, yes, before, to Matt's point, people wouldn't report. So lack of reporting, or they'd get a niggle at work, they'd work through it and work through it, they'd go home, they'd cool down, and then all of a sudden they'd be ringing up and saying, oh, I can't come into work today, I'm too sore to come in, or you're getting a conversation started when they're already at a treater. And so you've already lost that early intervention piece. And it's how do you actually get that component away from the self-treatment or the Dr. Google component. There's nothing worse than they go and look up there, they do that self-diagnosis off Dr. Google, and you talk to them, they say, oh, I could have this. And I say, well, I could have lots of things off Dr. Google, but people get into that routine because they don't want to be seen doing the wrong thing. So they'll try every avenue before they go down that path. And if you don't give them an easy system to use, then they will step outside that particular area. And again, you don't want them having to go over weekends. Say if they're got an illness or an issue on a Thursday or a Friday, nothing's open on a weekend. You end them up with in EDs and all that kind of thing. And we all know that if you get an employee that goes through an ED, they're in, they're out, and then they're usually coming back there with a lost time certificate. So they've already got a mindset that, okay, I've got an injury that maybe is worse than what it really is. And then to Matt's point, you've just turned that into a chronic component where you've actually got to try and get that employee back that, yep, this is treatable. And how do you do that process? So it's that whole one for us. Ours is strains, back strains, shoulder strains. You got a high level of pain and discomfort when they go through. So they're not really thinking clearly. They just want to get rid of that pain where they can. And if you haven't got that early treatment provider, then they will step out. And I think the early treatment provider, if they're not on site, you have like the VIP clinics so that you can get them into the appropriate treater straight away, and you go with it from there. For us, it works quite successfully.
And I think just on that, Hudson, sorry, before you go, but I think, Andrew, you raised a really good point with regards to, there's early intervention comes in a number of different forms. For us, early intervention, that on-site clinician, on-site physio component is key because it gives people easy access to a health professional without necessarily the need to be losing time going off-site or, spending 2 hours, 3 hours, being supervised to a doctor or a physio. But that relationship is really key, and that rapport, Andrew, I think you mentioned, is key, and not just with the on-site physio, but also with management on-site. I think management play a really big part in fostering a culture of early reporting of niggles. Without that, without all those players with workers, management, and the on-site provider or your clinician working, to the same playbook, you're not going to get a good outcome. You really need to work hard to build that culture within an organisation. And I think you're right. A successful early intervention program, injury management program on site, while it is an initial cost to an organisation, what we find is that within the first 3 to 6 months, it pays for itself 10 times over by reducing your LTIs, your MTIs, and your claims. And those claims, the impact of those claims over 3 years is significant. So a well-run program should be cost positive for an organisation, not cost negative.
Can I just jump in, Hudson? There, a good point Matt just raised was the supervisor level. So they're the first. They should be your first point of contact, where you hope you've got that open rapport between an employee and a frontline manager. And if the frontline manager has that right empathy and knows the process to follow, it gives that level of comfort for the employee to build that next step, that they trust what the programs in place are. Any of our workers' comp data, any of our early intervention data has shown that if the empathy is correct, the employee actually takes on all these programs a lot easier, and it just creates that feeling of trust across the area.
Thanks, some really good points. So moving to the impact for businesses. So when we're looking at business delaying, not intentionally so, but perhaps a lack of an early intervention platform, there is going to be a risk to employee health, injuries, and then ultimately an impact on productivity and even morale. We have seen in our data that we collect at Sonder an increase in absenteeism in these instances. There can be a deterioration in safety cultures, and employee engagement can decrease, all of which have a productivity and operational cost, but then also a financial implication. So question to Matt, what's been Bodycare's approach to reducing some of the barriers in accessing care, making it easier and more timely to reduce these impacts?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there, removing those barriers is absolutely key. I think there's a couple of things. One is what we're really talking about here is a shift from a reactive model to a proactive model, and again, it's easier said than done in a lot of cases. I think removing the barriers is key. And you need to set the expectations with your workers. And one of the things that we do with clients is we're really big on what we call our implementation phase. And that usually takes about 4 weeks, but that is where we will head out on site with our on-site physios, and we will present to management. But more importantly, we actually present to the workers. We attend all the toolbox talks for 4 weeks, and really try and plant the seed of, well, why are we here on site? What are we here to achieve? So that by the time we start, we hit the ground running. Often we sort of find there's 2 ways an on-site injury prevention program can work, whether it's on-site or off-site. One is we start and there is a barrier, and we find the diary isn't busy because there is a bit of a fear. It's, oh, hang on a second, is this my employer spying on me here? Do I really want to get involved in this program? And that's that cultural piece we were talking about. Whereas some organisations, we start on day one, there is a queue outside the front of the treatment room. And what we're really trying to encourage people to do is come to see us. And I'll give you an example. This is quite a common example for us. Someone sits on a forklift all day. They don't feel pain, but often they get home at night and they're a bit sore. They're a bit tight. And, often that is the start of something a little bit more sinister. It's those people that would normally not say anything, and they push through this pain, and every night it just gets a little bit worse and a little bit worse until all of a sudden they get off their forklift and bang, their disc goes in their lower back, L4-5 disc, and they're in big trouble. It's those sorts of people that we encourage to come see us day one, because to give someone some advice on seating posture, some core strengthening exercises, it's easy to do for a physio and will have an immediate impact, and you've just straight away avoided that LTI, MTI. So removing the barriers is really about breaking down that fear that a lot of employees and employers can have. I think there's also something to be said about the work-related versus non-work-related piece here. One thing we see a lot of in our engagements with clients is, particularly when we first start, that old model is someone would hurt their shoulder playing cricket on the weekend. And traditionally, where there's no early intervention access, the only way you can raise this with your employer is to put in an incident report or a claim. These people that have hurt their shoulder playing cricket on the weekend will come in on the Monday and go, oh, I've just hurt my shoulder at work, because that's the way they know they're going to get looked after. That's a terrible model. It's a terrible model for reporting, and we see it a lot of the time. But when you instill this culture of early intervention, early reporting, and you make it clear to your employers that, look, you're going to get looked after with our early intervention program, irrespective of whether it's work-related or non-work related, it encourages people to be open and honest. And it's hard to, lie to a physio. We'll normally figure it out eventually. But, I think opening a service up to something like that can really reduce the number of incidents, claims that any organisation has that maybe shouldn't be there or not justified in the first place. So encouraging openness and honesty is a really key part of early intervention. But yeah, so I think it's a combination of all of those things, but, a well-run program, and again, it ties nicely into, the Sonder and the care line that Sonder have and how that plays quite nicely. That can be that first port of call in early intervention. Sonder will then have access to the on-site physio diary or the off-site clinics, and it can tie quite nicely into that early intervention piece as well.
Thank you. So, Andrew, for Blackmores, have you seen with a more proactive injury management, has it influenced any of the absenteeism, reduced some of the administrative burden that you might have had in your own team or you personally?
Oh, it does. It reduces across the board. But I think you sort of got to look at that. It's that whole piece in where do you actually go with it? How do you get that whole buy-in from the employee? To Matt's point there, it's more of a holistic service. So it's just another piece. It's a bit like we use the word safety culture an awful lot, probably too much. It's really just a workplace culture. Are they comfortable? Are they open to, yep, they can go and report something? The absenteeism, I think that you certainly get a lot more people that are comfortable to come and use an early triage provider because they know that their colleagues have used them. They've had some good fixes with it. They've got good advice, and it's easy to do. And if we can try and tie it into this holistic approach with the care line with Sonder, that's the main aim, because that then, one, administrative burden on invoicing, contact details, communication to employees. If there is only one communication place, you don't get that mix of, I've got an injured employee, who do I ring? Do you have two providers? Where if you've got one provider, you want that to be seamless as much as what we possibly can. And you hope that it also builds up the interaction on the care line at the same time. Like, my main aim would be that, yes, the early intervention, early triage works good, but it also then gives more employees comfort to sign up for Sonder before they need it. So it's sitting there, the app's there. They might not use it, but at least they're comfortable to use it.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I should also just point out, we touched on this before, but in our view, there is a big difference between early intervention data versus incident claims data. And traditionally, most organisations, they base their approach and their risk mitigation strategies on that incident and claims data. For us, that's a very reactive way to build your prevention programs. When we talk about early intervention data, we're capturing those niggles, those things that wouldn't normally be reported or captured. And it gives you a far better insight into the risks that your site or your organisation faces. And in turn, you can then actually build really meaningful, tailored risk mitigation strategies, whether or not that's manual handling training for this particular group of workers and this particular task, or whether it's doing risk assessments on this area because you're getting a lot of injuries out of this particular group of workers. So it enables you, it gives you far better insights. It enables you to tailor your approach in that prevention space a little bit more, which is key. And that prevention is a big part of early intervention. It's not just the reporting of niggles and the treatment side of things. It starts before then.
You mentioned risk, Matthew, there. Andrew, have you seen, is that something that you use as a risk control as part of your organisation now, and it's in order to track its effectiveness?
Oh, most definitely you have to. It's you're getting a lot more accurate data that you can actually correlate where you're going with it. You can pinpoint and pick trends. So if you've got certain tasks, certain areas, you might have certain lines that are causing more of an issue. you can then start to pinpoint some of your demographics. Have you got a certain group of employee that's more prone to be picking up similar types of treatment, and are they using it more frequently than others? But also it gives you that pattern of some people are taking longer to get recovery, and they might get more sessions, and you've got to try and pinpoint, is it an age factor? Is there other underlying issues there? So all that kind of gear is a risk-based approach for it.
All right. So what needs to be done? We've spoken a lot about the problems and the impact that can have on organizations and individuals. So we're going to talk through some of the benefits of an early intervention and a centralized care, so a single point of entry to access that care. The key that we have found in reducing injury-related costs is that early intervention, which we've spoken through, by providing employees with that early, easy access from care from the start. Businesses can prevent minor injuries from escalating into long-term chronic issues, which aids fast recovery, but also helps organizations manage risk, improve overall health and safety. The advantages of having this streamlined approach means that you can track injuries as well. There's nothing worse than individuals being injured and you're not even aware of it until it escalates to something far more serious than it initially was. So a question for yourself, Matt. Could you talk through some of the value of your organization's Bodycare, who Sonder has partnered with, your offsite, on-site physio appointments, and just how quick and the access to these appointments can be, and the quality of that to employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, on-site injury prevention, on-site physio, when we started doing this 20 years ago, it wasn't the norm in Australia, and certainly, you didn't find many organisations doing it. It's certainly exploded since then. We find not many physios make good occupational physios. It's a fairly specialised field. But yeah, look, generally the way we would work with an organisation is we would look at the risk profile of the organisation, the size of the site or the organisation, and also the breakdown of their current injuries. I mean, are they musculoskeletal injuries in nature, or are they psych in nature, or are they medical in nature? More often than not, the risk to most employees in that blue collar space is musculoskeletal sprains and strains. That's what we see most of. That's where their insurance premiums sort of cover those sorts of injuries more than anything else. Psych is obviously increasing, as we all know. Generally, the way we would work is we would look at an organisation, and if we would base the number of hours a week of the on-site physio program on the number of staff on site. So if you've got a site with 300 people, you might be looking at 10 to 12 hours of on-site physiotherapy per week. We would generally try and structure those hours around shift crossovers to make the program accessible to as much of the workplace as we possibly can, which is really key, while also minimising any operational disruptions as well. For us, the difference is, someone wants to see a physio in an on-site program, they're booking in with an on-site diary through Sonder. They'd call up Sonder or through the app, and Sonder would be able to make that appointment directly into the physio's on-site diary. Generally, appointments are 20 minutes in length. You're losing 20 minutes of operational time versus hours potentially of going on site. So generally, we would, you'd look to run a program like this. A successful program should be run minimum of 2 times a week. So if you've got 6 hours, you'd look at 3 hours on a Tuesday, 3 hours on a Thursday. That allows for continuity of treatment for the physio. If we see someone, we can see them again in 2 days. If we have to wait a week to see them again, it can sometimes be a bit of a hindrance. But that said, there is also a network, as again, we've partnered with Sonder, a network of what we call our VIP clinics, and certainly, Blackmores use it as well. That's a network of about 370 clinics across the country, primarily physios. We also have doctors and occupational physicians, but those clinics are there to support our clients in the event that the on-site physio is not there. Now, I would say that, generally 95+% of all workers can be treated and managed and seen on site, of all different severities. On the odd occasion where a physio might not be there and there is an urgent need for someone to get into care, into a physio, they can be booked into one of our VIP clinics immediately. The VIP clinic will then generally look to refer that worker back to the on-site program. For us, everything's run through the software platform, whether it's on-site or off-site. So you've got accountability. You know exactly what's happening with Mary or Bob. There are limits you can set on treatments, so you're not losing control, or you're not losing that sort of visibility over your workforce. So yeah, between the combination of on-site physio and off-site physio, it creates that easy access point for all workers to be able to get that care when they need to. I think it's worth touching base here, and I think one of the things that we find, and this is changing a lot within organisations now. Traditionally, when someone has a musculoskeletal sprain or strain or injury, the traditional model would have been, let's get them in with the company doctor. Now, I'm not bagging doctors. We work with doctors all around the country in New Zealand. They're fantastic. But when it comes to managing and treating musculoskeletal injuries, they are probably not best placed. So what you traditionally find is someone will book in with a doctor, company doctor, they'd go there, maybe supervised, maybe not, by a manager. And a lot of the time, that doctor would put them on modified duties, or at worst, put them off work entirely for a week, when really that's probably not a justified approach. Then that doctor would then book into an on-site or to an off-site physio, their physio, for that continued treatment. It's adding complexity to the model. It's reducing ease of access, and it's increasing cost for a lot of organisations. So for us, what we encourage our clients to do is and we assist them in doing this, is to look at what your worker is presenting with. If it's musculoskeletal, physio is your best, early access point to get the best care. If it's medical, if it's a laceration, if it's chest pain, absolutely get in with your doctor. But it's about being able to identify what is the issue here, or is it psych? Do we actually need to go to a GP because this is actually more psych-driven than musculoskeletal? And then accessing that professional straight away, rather than taking these roundabout loops into that care.
So, Andrew, have you seen
any question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Thank you. So, Andrew, in terms of your organisation, have you seen a better visibility for your WHS team? Have you benefited from that, given that there's a more proactive, streamlined approach, and then your team has better visibility and reporting?
Almost, and it's one of these things, you've got to keep a close oversight. You've got to know where it's going, who's using the physio, what are they using them for, and it's a matter of making certain that the treatment's been following the trends that you're picking up through your reporting. I think a couple of points Matt made mention of there are really crucial to an on-site early intervention is the occupational physio. You need the right person for your site and for your workforce. And you have to be confident enough and strong enough to go back to the provider and say, there's not enough rapport, the rapport's incorrect, feedback isn't great, and how do we improve that? Because you actually want your early intervention person to be part of the actual workforce team, that they're comfortable. So if that person's out there walking around on the floor where they know the people, they know the task, it also helps when another employee comes along and says, I was just doing this task and this is what I did, so that they know they're getting an accurate report of potentially what the mechanisms were. And the employee also knows that they're talking to someone that knows what they do. So you've already got that component there. And the knowledge, the site knowledge can't be overemphasized from the early intervention, because they do know what tasks they're looking at, and they're able to sort of provide advice, and they can go back to the frontline managers in regard to how do we actually make changes? Is there potential for rotation? What does your job task analysis look like? As you can do your job dictionaries, how do you build up your dossier of what is looking good in the proactive space? And I think it also touches to that psychosocial, where we're heading down this path of the more external services from trusted suppliers and trusted sources give the employee the comfort level that should impact and also provide that support mechanism that they know where to go to. And you can utilise from the Bodycare component all the way through to Sonder, that maybe there's an underlying issue there that they'll then start to feel more confident with and ring up the care line to seek the appropriate treatment from the qualified professionals. And I think that everyone can attest to the fact that experience shows us the quicker the employee gets that accurate, consistent healthcare advice and support, from someone that they trust, you'll start to minimize any of those future injuries coming in. And that's a win-win situation. So that cuts back your absenteeism, it cuts back having to get casuals in, and it provides that next support level for the supervisors, you name it. So it's a win-win all the way around.
And I think just on that as well, Andrew, is you've got, I touched on it before, but like I said, there is a big difference between a physio that works in a private practice and an occupational physio. And the skill of a good occupational physio is someone that can engage with a workforce at multiple different levels, not just at the ground level, people that work out on the floor, but also management. And that is key. They need to become part of the furniture. Workers have the right to choose their own treating practitioners. They can choose their own doctors, they can choose their own physios. A successful program is one in which everyone on site chooses to see the on-site physio because they know they're going to get the best possible care they can. So we find that you're right, Andrew. And it does happen. You can put a physio on site that you think is good, but they're actually not culturally a very good fit, and you're just not getting that buy-in from workers, and it's not fostering that culture of early reporting. People are not wanting to go see the physio. That's a failed program, and in those situations, you're better off just moving to a model where you're sending people back off site. So you've got to find the right people that can get the best outcome for the business. And I think the other thing to note is there are a lot of organizations, and we see this a lot, that have the right intention. They think, great, I want to bring on an early intervention physio program to achieve all these things. And they've got a relationship with a local clinic. It could be in a regional part of Australia, and they've got a relationship with a local clinic, private practice. And they approach that practice, and the practice goes, yep, great, we'll send one of our physios on site. And more often than not, those programs fail because the treating practitioners are coming at it from a private practice point of view. Things like the way they capture data, everything's paper-based. They're still writing all their notes on bits of paper. I think for a program that's to be successful, for us, for example, everything is tech-driven. Everything we do runs through the tech, which means we can pull out meaningful data, meaningful insights to guide the prevention programs that we then run. As a general rule, we're treating on site 50% of the time, and then the other 50% of the time, our physios are out on the floor. We're working with the team. We're doing job dictionaries, as you mentioned, Andrew, JTAs, ergo assessments for office staff, manual handling training, etc. So any program that is 100% treatment, you're missing the boat, we believe. You're sort of getting half of the benefit of an on-site program. It needs to be in that prevention space as well.
Thank you. So some of the key takeaways to summarize some of the benefits of a more proactive early intervention approach, there's reduced absenteeism and improved employee engagement. There's going to be a better supportive approach to health and safety, which ultimately reduces cost claims, enables better recovery, so reduced absenteeism, and minimizes the risk of prolonged injuries, and overall strengthens a particular organization's risk management framework. So, Andrew, question for yourself. For an organization looking to start to prioritize an early intervention platform or program, what advice would you share to how to start that journey?
I think for me, it's about what can be supplied that gives the benefit to the employee. It's got to be quick. It's got to be good access, easy access. The assistance has got to be clear and prompt, and it's got to be qualified. So the employee's got to feel comfort from whoever they're talking to, be it a telehealth provider, be it the on-site physio, be it a GP through the Sonder services. They've got to feel that person is giving them good advice. And for the company side of it, you want to make certain it's going to reduce your admin. How does it build rapport? And how do you streamline practices so that, again, it's in building an employee confidence component. And I think the big thing for me is how do I build a synergy from our early intervention, early triage into the care line for Sonder to build both support mechanisms out of that. And we've actually seen our reduction in our lost time days as a result of it. We've seen our injury days away from work reduce. And a lot of those programs we get for someone who they've got a workers' comp claim even, we utilise the on-site physio for some of those treatment programs because the employee is actually asking, can we go to the on-site physio because they've got that rapport already built up for them? And if not, we look at the VIP process. So if someone lives too far away or they can't get there, it's the other avenue of, again, it's simple, it's easy to access. So not all the time can you get them into the workplace, but if you've got the avenue of the VIP, and if that can be organised by an external party, fantastic. But it's got to be easy, good advice, and has a good rapport.
So for yourself, Matt, how have you seen programs implemented, and what would you see as essential to establishing a more proactive workplace culture?
Yeah, it's I think it starts with management, fostering that culture of early reporting. You know, some organisations tend to historically sweep things under the rug a little bit, which is a very reactive and dangerous model. But I think it's a program to run successfully. It needs to be onboarded and implemented properly, not just by the on-site provider or your triage partner, but also management. And making sure you set the expectations very clearly for staff as to why that on-site provider or that injury prevention provider or that early intervention provider is there in the first place. Most people buy into that pretty well. I think where you can have some challenges with implementing early intervention programs like this, like an on-site injury prevention program, is heavily unionized, sites. Sometimes unions can kick up a bit of a stink. However, what we find is that once we've met with unions, once you explain the agenda and the rationale behind an early intervention program like these, unions buy in and are actually really supportive of these sorts of programs because they are for the benefit of the worker. And I think also just trying to generally foster a culture of improved health and well-being. It's not just about injuries. Programs like this, Sonder's programs, Bodycare's programs. It's not just about injuries. It's about general health and well-being and making sure your workforce is as healthy and as happy as possible. And that can be things like rolling out heart check programs, rolling out flu vaccinations, mental health first aid training, all these other levers that can be pulled. They make up part of that overall picture. So it's really just making sure you implement well, and any holistic approach you can take is going to be of benefit to employer and employee. And making sure you get the right clinicians, whether it's on site, whether it's off site, whether it's on the other end of the phone line, Hudson. Making sure you're getting the right people that are engaging with your workforce makes a big difference.
So moving to a Q&A, feel free to put any questions into the webinar chat as we move into it. But I do have a question for yourself, Andrew. You mentioned there can be difficulties overcoming some resistance to change with a more reactive style of injury management. How have you seen that done well or poorly, if you have seen that done in the past?
I think it's all a communication. So you've got to have all your facts and figures ready to go as far as what does your trending data look like. You've got to know where your pain points are for the employee, for the business, because at the end of the day, these programs aren't cheap programs to get up and running. And normally, if you haven't got a program, this is an extra budget cost. So there's a whole sell piece to the financial side of that for the business. Let's just take away the benefit to the employee and the welfare. It's another added cost that if you can't show that there's going to be benefits for the bottom line, then it's always going to be a tough sell, because at the end of the day, the business is there to make money, plus be a good employer. But if you don't make the money, then you can't get a good program in place. So you've got to make certain that you do your due diligence pieces in getting that accurate information. And then once your final results are that you've got the financial side of it, it's then working with the provider that you want to do so that you actually do get that next buy-in step with the communication piece. And to Matt's point, they've been doing this for a long time. I've been a customer of them for a long time. So we have a pretty good relationship in regard to what works How does the communication go? And how do you get that continual support mechanism in place that the employee is comfortable that it's just not a way of trying to stop an employee going to seek medical help if they want to. It's providing that correct support that they're comfortable and even asked to use the intervention without going to their own GP. Once you can start to get that buy-in, and every business is completely different. There's no sort of rule of thumb other than open, honest, and communicate or over-communicate what they can use it for. And if there's restrictions, you've got to make certain that you've got to put those restrictions. You've got to be very clear that you have a limit of sessions before it gets assessed. You've got to let the people know that we use trending data from it, but that trending data is only limited to a certain group of people that will not release anything else, and it goes from there. So it's building that trust and rapport to get a good program in place, but it's also make sure you monitor it. And you got to get buy-in as far as from whoever your support provider is. Is there extra things there? Matt mentioned flu vaccinations, mental health first aider. They're all stock standard gear that actually help the employee, but they also help the business. So you've got to make certain that when you send that cost out, this does help the business in the short, medium, and long term. So these are actually value-add programs and not just cost programs. And you've got to be able to push that point.
Yeah, and I think just on that, Andrew, you're right, and we did touch on it before, but in the end, businesses are there to make money, but you need healthy workers to do so. And you know what we tend to find is it's hard to quantify the dollar value of an effective early intervention program. One of the ways that we tend to do it is we classify everyone that we see on site, and we basically put them into one of two buckets. And you know, you're either a proactive patient or you're a prevented claim patient. Now, that's quite a generic term, but what we say is we take those people that come to see us with what we consider to be more serious type injuries that we know without intervention, early intervention, would probably progress to some sort of LTI or claim, based on our experience, having done this for a long time. And then we put a number on that, a dollar value, and we say, look, had this particular injury gone to claim, data suggests that the cost for that, just in terms of, you know, your lost time or your insurance premiums, would be X. And one of the things we like to do with our clients, particularly for the bean counters, who often are the ones that are signing the contracts, is to say, look, for this particular period of time, we think we've saved you X amount of money in your insurance premiums, etc., lost time, you know, which again, it's you know, it's not an exact science, but it gives some sort of indication as to the value from a financial point of view of an effective early intervention program.
Well, question for yourself, Matt. As you've grown as an organisation, one from the attendees here, how have you been able to scale the offering as you know, the appetite across organisations has grown? Obviously, you've partnered with our organisation and others as well to facilitate that growth. And what else?
Yeah, look, I think industry knowledge is a really important part for us. I mean, we work along a lot of these industry verticals, and you start to learn the risks in each industry, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's logistics, you name it. And I think, you know, we've been able to build over the course of 20 years a pretty robust portfolio of early intervention programs that we have run. Now, Andrew touched on before, no two companies are the same, no two sites are the same, but there is a knowledge there and a portfolio of this wealth of information that we've got, or programs that we've run, that we can pull on to roll out to clients. So we're never starting from scratch anymore, which is a massive, you know, it's a big deal for us. You know, and if we roll out a program, you know, most of our clients are national organisations. You know, if we roll a successful program at one site, you know, a prevention program out there, and we get good outcomes, we will then take that program and scale it to the rest of the sites across the country for that organisation. So there is a scale piece as well, and I think that's an important part to note, particularly for larger organisations where you have multiple sites. Some organisations they're very siloed. So they've got one provider here and one provider there and one provider here. And that becomes very difficult to manage. There's no consistency. There's no consistency in reporting. And there's no communication between the providers at each site. So there's no learnings that you can take. So I think that scaling piece is a really important one. We like to run our programs nationally, even though they're tailored to the site. But yeah, look, it's absolutely, I think as we've gotten bigger over the years, we find it a lot easier to engage with a lot of those larger organisations. And it can be quite difficult. It's quite challenging at times, but yeah, it's definitely an enjoyable and rewarding part of what we do.
Another question that's come through, Andrew, is how do you work through some of the stigma sometimes in, let's say, more traditional workforces where the culture might be to downplay injuries, to sort of avoid appearing weak or unproductive and just sort of push through? I certainly worked in an environment where that was certainly the case for a long time. Have you had any sort of breakthroughs in overcoming that type of mentality?
It's those kind of situations where you've actually got to work with your frontline leaders in regard to getting them on side in regard to what are the benefits of the program by allowing the employees that free access, but also highlighting the fact to the frontline managers that they're maybe some kind of a bias at different times can be portrayed across without them even realising that prevents that or creates that stigma. So it's a matter of that education for the leadership, that you actually want to be able to get them that they'll be a promoter for the actual service. Because if you don't get them on side, you're never going to get the employee to work their way through that. Because at the end of the day, the frontline leader is the meat in the sandwich. And so they're getting it from the employee, they're getting it from senior management. So if you've got to work out, if it's not your frontline managers, it's more senior managers, then it's up to someone like myself to work through what are their concerns, why have they got an issue with it, why is their unconscious bias actually starting to create an issue for you and for your employee to receive quick, targeted advice and things along those lines. And just to go back to Matt's point about these national programs, it's really imperative that you have one consistent approach across your sites. Yes, every site's completely different. They've got different cultures. They've got different ways of working, or might be one business. But if you've got different providers, it really does create a different work process. If you get a group of physios together, it's like handbags at 5 paces. You actually need the one company so that you're all singing from that same area, and you've got the similar type programs just targeted differently or maybe delivered differently. So you've got to have consistency across the board.
Thanks very much. Look, we'll move on from questions. I think we've covered most of it come through, but if we didn't get directly answer your question, there were some overlaps there. Just keep an eye on your inbox and we'll make sure we follow up. Any other questions come through, feel free to email through to marketing@sonder.io. We'll get back to you if questions come up afterwards. So to conclude and wrap things up here, what we're looking at about the value of an early intervention platform. So we're looking to reduce costs ultimately, boost employee engagement, support employee health. We're looking to provide timely access to care so businesses can improve recovery outcomes, reduce absenteeism, and also increase the visibility of those so that individual line managers and WHS teams can partner with and understand the impact of these things, and ultimately build a stronger culture of safety and well-being. Combine this with our traditional personal non-work-related wellbeing offering for non-work-related injuries as well, which might indirectly answer some of the other questions that came through. I just want to say a huge thank you to some of the panelists, the 2 panelists. So thank you, Andrew and Matt, and thanks to everyone who joined for dialing in today. And hopefully you found some of this really useful from 2 really experienced professionals in this industry. So if you have any other questions about how Sonder can assist with your organization in this space regarding early intervention, feel free to reach out. If you have any other questions, email them through as well. Thanks again. Hope everyone has a great day. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Watson.